My name is Sha and I am 18 years old. Today, people call me a professional violinist, but behind every note I play lies a story carved out of struggle, sacrifice, and unshakable love. I first touched a violin when I was only 2 years old. It was a mine it belonged to one of my classmates in kindergarten. She would leave it in class after practice, and when no one was watching, I would pick it up and try to mimic the way she held it. At first, the strings only screamed under my tiny fingers, but slowly, I began to hear fragments of music. The violin spoke to me in a language no one had to translate. We were very poor. My father worked odd jobs, my mother sold fruits by the roadside, and we barely had enough for food, let alone instruments. But once my parents noticed the way my eyes lit up each time I touched that violin, they decided to make the impossible possible. I still remember the night they sat in our small room whispering. The next week, they sold nearly everything they owned at a radio, some of our best pots, even the small goat we relied on for milk. With trembling hands, my father placed a second-hand violin in my lap. It wasn't shiny, it wasn't new, but to me, it was the most beautiful thing in the world. Learning was not easy. We could not afford a teacher, so I taught myself. I would sneak into the library, reading worn-out books on music theory, copying diagrams of finger positions, and then running home to practice until my fingers bled. Many times, neighbors would knock on our door complaining of the nose. Many times, hunger gnawed at my stomach, but the violin filled me with a strange kind of nourishment. There were days I wanted to give up, days when the strings snapped and we couldn't afford replacements, when my bow broke and my father glued it together again with shaking hands. But every time I thought of stopping, I would see my mother's face. I remember her saying, "Sha, you are our song. Don't stop playing." By the time I was 12, I had begun performing in small community gatherings, weddings, and schools. At 15, a video of me playing under a streetlight went viral. A kind stranger saw it and offered to sponsor my lessons. For the first time, I had a real teacher, and the progress was like fire spreading in dry grass. Now, at 18, I stand on stages I once only dreamed of. The violin is no longer just an instrument, it is my story, my parents' sacrifice, the voice of our poverty turned into music. Every bow stroke carries the weight of nights we went without food, of my father's calloused hands tightening loose strings, of my mother's whispered prayers. When people applaud after I perform, I smell a deep sigh. I hear only to claps louder than the rest, the hands of my father and mother, who gave up everything so their daughter could turn struggle into symphony. This is not just my music. This is our life sung through strings.